Hello and thank you for tuning in. My name is Ville Mäkelä. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at LMU Munich. In this talk, I will present our CHI 2020 paper, Virtual Field Studies, Conducting Studies on Public Displays in Virtual Reality. Our motivation for this work is that traditional field studies are often difficult, expensive, and time-consuming. This is especially true for studies that involve deploying interactive technology in the field, such as prototypes of public displays. We often struggle with finding suitable locations and obtaining permission. Setting up and maintaining the deployment requires continuous attention. Hardware needs to be maintained, and the deployment may suffer from various external factors such as power outages, network issues, misuse, and even vandalism. Also, data collection in the field is time-consuming, as researchers need to be present for observations and interviews. We envision running field studies in virtual reality. Because we have total control of the virtual world, we do not face the same problems with permissions or with setting up and maintaining the deployment. Data collection is also safer and easier. Also, VR brings in many additional possibilities. First, we can conduct research in locations that we could not otherwise access, such as spaces that are still being built or spaces that are a considerable distance away. Second, in the virtual world, we overcome physical limitations. We can change anything in the virtual world with little to no effort that would require tedious configurations or physical labor in the real world. Finally, in VR we can potentially study situations that would be difficult to study in the real world, for example, situations that occur only rarely, or situations that might otherwise be dangerous to participants. Due to these reasons, we seek to understand the feasibility of conducting field studies in virtual reality. The most important question is whether virtual field studies can produce ecologically valid results. This largely revolves around the question of how similarly people behave in simulated virtual environments compared to real-world environments, and what effect any differences in behavior might have on the results. Another important point is that virtual field studies are, of course, not without effort either. The question is, therefore, how much effort virtual field studies are, and if or when this effort is justified. The third major point is that VR is accessed very differently from real-world spaces. This brings forth the question of whether user studies in VR need to be designed differently. In our early investigation of this topic, we touch upon all three of these questions. To enable this research, we built a virtual replica of an existing real-world space. This space is a lobby area in a university building, which is a very common type of space in public display research, and therefore a good basis for our work. We also implemented technology to be used within these spaces, including a non-interactive public display application and a playful gesture-controlled application. Using this virtual replica, we conducted two user studies where we compared the results from a virtual field study to the results from an identical real-world study. In study 1, we investigated whether the honeypot effect could occur in VR. The honeypot effect refers to a phenomenon where people pay more attention to a display when other people are looking at or interacting with it. We conducted a between-subject study with 40 participants. 20 participants took part in the real-world study and 20 in the virtual study. The real-world study was conducted in the university building setting as previously described, whereas the virtual study was conducted in a lab. In both settings, the 20 participants were further divided into two groups. One group experienced the study with no audience present, while another group experienced the study while an audience expressed interest in the public display. In the real-world setting, the audience consisted of 3 actors who were observing the display's content. In the virtual world, the audience consisted of 3 virtual agents. The participants' task was to walk through the space and retrieve a code word from a note at the other end of the space and return to their starting position. This way, participants passed by the display without being aware that the display was out of focus. The task was repeated twice. We collected gaze data to later analyze how much attention participants paid to the display. Real-world users wore a Tobii Pro Classes 2 wearable eye tracker, and with VR users we used the Vive Pro and its built-in eye tracker. After the tasks, we assessed whether participants had acknowledged the display by asking them to describe its content. In both settings, the presence of an audience increased attention towards the display. In the real-world setting, when an audience was present, the duration looking at the display increased, and a bigger number of participants could describe the content on the public display. In VR, we observed similar effects for both metrics, but gaze durations were higher. Therefore, we observed the honeypot effect in both the real world and the virtual world. When an audience was present, the average duration looking at the public display increased, and a higher number of participants perceived the content on the display. However, gaze times were considerably higher in VR than in the real world. This is most likely explained by the movement method in VR, as participants used a controller to move around in the large space. This way of movement was slower, and hence participants had more time to observe the display. Our other consideration is that participants might have also been overall more interested in observing the virtual space than the real world space. We will get back to this consideration in the second study. In the second study, we explored how users notice, approach, and engage with interactive displays in virtual environments. For this study, we built a playful public display application where participants could use their on-screen skeleton to catch balls falling from the top of the screen to increase their score. The application was enabled by a Kinect 1 sensor. We also implemented a tablet application for both settings. This application was a quiz which consisted of multiple choice questions. We told participants to complete the quiz and that most people take around 7 minutes to finish. We told participants that the researcher will leave the space for the duration of the quiz and return after a period of time with a questionnaire. In the VR condition, we told participants that a virtual character will bring the questionnaire so that they would not take off their head-mounted display after the quiz. In reality, the tablet quiz was a distraction which was rigged to finish after around 2 minutes. Hence, participants had to wait for the researcher to return for around 5 minutes. Participants were not aware that the public display was our true focus, and they were also not aware that we were interested in what would happen during this waiting period. This created an opportunity for the participants to discover the public display on their own. The real-world condition was again carried out on-site, and the VR condition was carried out in a lab setting, however this time with some improvements over Study 1. The VR condition was set up in a large meeting room where we set up 4 trackers instead of the usual 2 for more reliable tracking and a larger tracking space. We also used the Vive Pro wireless upgrade so that participants could use the head-mounted display without being attached to anything and without having to worry about cables. We observed the participants' behavior through video recordings and complemented our observations with interviews. We checked whether participants did any of the 4 primary activities, whether they noticed the public display, approached it, stopped in front of it, or started interacting with it. The frequency of the first 3 activities was comparable in both settings. A slight difference was observed in that 7 participants interacted with the display in VR, while 4 participants did the same in the real world. This might suggest that users are more encouraged to interact with the public display in VR. This links to our earlier observations that users were generally more interested in looking around and exploring the virtual space than the real-world space. The way participants explored and interacted with the display was largely similar in both settings. Those who did try out the display were visibly engaged with it. An encouraging observation is that VR users did not seem at all bothered or slowed down by the head-mounted display. The average interaction times with the display were also comparable, 109 seconds in VR and 130 seconds in the real world. In addition to participants being generally more active in VR than in the real world, we also identified factors that may have the potential of affecting study results. All of these were minor in our study, but they may be more significant in other studies. First, participants needed a VR controller to interact with the tablet game as well as to fill in the questionnaire in VR. 5 participants reported that they were unsure what they should do about the controller while they were waiting. Second, in the real-world condition, 4 participants accessed their smartphones and paid little attention to their surroundings, whereas in VR this option did not exist. Third, some users reported that the video recording made them unsure about how they should behave while they were waiting. Interestingly, this was only reported for the VR condition and not the real-world condition. Finally, 3 participants reported that they were careful about moving around in VR because they had previous experiences where they had hit something while wearing an HMD. Most of our study participants were active, but it should be acknowledged that some users may be more careful than usual in VR. Drawing on our results and experiences, we discussed the potential and challenges of virtual field studies. Our first question was whether virtual field studies can produce ecologically valid results. We observed a surprising level of similarity between the results from virtual and real field studies. These results are promising and suggest that virtual field studies can be valid for studying many aspects of technology deployed in the wild. However, more studies are needed for a comprehensive understanding of the potential and limitations of virtual field studies in different contexts. Most notably, we observed that participants were more active in VR. They moved and looked around more and also seemed to be more encouraged to interact with the virtual public display. Therefore, strong focus on quantitative data, such as usage statistics, may not be fully reliable. Another factor that warrants more studies is the types of devices that are available in virtual and real-world settings. In particular, smartphones are natural for real-world users, but they cannot be accessed in VR without special solutions. Our second question was how much effort virtual field studies are compared to traditional field studies. The unique effort in virtual field studies is that the virtual environment must be built, which can take time. However, many modern tools are available for free, which makes this process easier. There are also various 3D assets available for free or for a low price. Some studies also require special solutions for the interactive scenarios that they aim to investigate, such as those that involve touch interaction. In some cases, this may require notable resources, although many of them are certainly doable in VR. To offset some of this effort, virtual studies have many advantages over real-world studies. First, obtaining permissions and maintaining the deployment are practically non-issues in VR. Second, setting up the deployment and making sure it works as intended is easier and less error-prone. Third, preparing and running the study sessions are considerably easier. In both of our studies, the real-world counterpart was much more demanding in terms of preparation, equipment, and traveling between the lab and the field study location. Fourth, the virtual environment that's built for the study can be easily reused or adapted for other studies. Researchers must consider the balance between effort and ecological validity. We believe that in ideal cases, virtual field studies can yield more valid results than lab studies, while requiring less effort than traditional field studies. However, virtual field studies have unique considerations in terms of the effort they may require. Traditional field studies are likely more suitable, especially when a real-world infrastructure is already available, or if the study focuses on long-term use. Getting users into a virtual space on a recurring basis is a particular challenge in virtual studies. In turn, we believe virtual field studies are especially valuable when the same virtual space will be used for multiple or complex studies, or when the conditions of the study will make it difficult or impossible to conduct in the real-world location. Our third question was how we should design field studies in VR. The key point of field studies is that we can evaluate how a technology is used in a natural, realistic setting, where people usually encounter the technology by chance. In this respect, virtual environments are very different. Hence, we must be creative in making virtual environments natural. We can achieve this by providing participants with a scenario that facilitates natural behavior and that distracts them from the true focus of the study. In our two studies, we achieved this in different ways. In study 1, we gave participants a task of fetching a note from the other end of the environment. This simulated a frequent scenario of walking through a public space during which participants had the chance to observe the public display while remaining unaware of its role in the study. In study 2, we gave participants another device as a distraction and ended its use prematurely without the participants realizing. This simulated a waiting situation, which is another frequent activity in public spaces as people wait for their friends or colleagues to arrive. During this time, participants had the chance to discover the public display on their own. In conclusion, through this research we have taken the first steps towards understanding the potential, strengths, and limitations of using VR as a tool for conducting field studies. Our findings are promising, as the results from two virtual field studies were largely comparable to the results from identical real-world studies. However, certain considerations must be accounted for. Most importantly, virtual field studies require that the virtual space is built, which may in some cases require significant resources. However, this is not always the case, and the space can be easily reused or adapted for further studies. On a similar note, enabling some interactive scenarios, such as those that use touch interaction, may require special solutions in VR. This concludes my talk. I hope you enjoyed it and that you refer to our paper for more details. Thank you.